I moved here to Ballarat in March 2015 and had just previously found out that Grandad, Samuel Henry Westlake, was born in this town and had only lived here for less than 2 years. I was interested to find out where he might have been born. I knew it couldn't be here in my street in Webb Avenue, as up to 1958 it had been a huge pile of mullock or tailings from mining gold, quartz, along with brickmaking on Black Hill directly behind my house. The street was then levelled and Housing Commission houses built, except for mine, which was a brick veneer built in 1960 by the Caseys, who lived here till it was sold to me. Today I enjoy the view of a lovely park and the hill behind me. It must be understood that over a century ago all of Ballarat was about gold mining, and there were mine shafts literally everywhere. Around the year 2000, the children's swings collapsed into a mine shaft one morning, luckily without any children. The mine shaft is now capped, along with the mine below this house across the road. What also drew me to this area was the enchanting Yarrawee River directly behind my house. A friend and I put a gate onto an easement at the end of my yard to be able to get to the river, and then discovered that it was someone else's property. Whoops! Oh well. It leads onto a lovely little glade surrounded by trees, straddling the bubbling creek-like river, backing onto walking and bike tracks, weaving past the pine trees on the hill, which were planted by school children after mining ceased near the end of World War I. Black Hill was a moonscape before then. Walking here sometimes it feels like North America, and I half expect an Indian on a pony to ride by. Anyway, back to Grandad Westlake. Samuel Westlake was born on the 29th of October 1893, at a time when Ballarat had become an incredible centre of wealth in Australia. Most of the rich architecture we see in the city centre today was built in the 1880s and 90s, the legacy of massive gold discoveries from those decades. By the time William Westlake, wife Annie and baby Samuel left for Western Australia in late 1894 or early 95, the gold boom had been waning for a few years. It was here in the bowels of the state government offices on Mayor Street at the Ballarat Archive Centre that I began my search. Foolishly, I began using the name Harry Westlake as the first name search. Next time, a week later, and armed with the name Samuel Westlake, I met with more success. There was a reference to his father William Westlake, along with his newly married wife Annie Jane, living in Darling Street, Redan, which is about 2.5 kilometres from the city centre as the crow flies, and about 3.5 kilometres from my house. Of course, I still had to prove my conviction by going through more council red tape, and further empowered by my special code given to me on the Government Archives website, and after being told I couldn't go into the special records room without leaving all pens at the counter, I acquiesced and left all my guns, knives and hand grenades as well. They then bought out the requested Ballarat rates books from 1892, 93 and 94 on a trolley. And bingo! On the Ballarat South Ward, as it was known then, listed under Darling Street, I found the name of my great-grandfather and granddad's father 2/3 down the page. William Westlake, 82A, Darling Street, coppersmith, ratepayer of a wood house. Some people on that page were paying for a hut and land. Interestingly, at the time, a rates payment was legally a miner's right, and it was the case up until the 1970s. Darling Street sounded familiar to me, so armed with Google Maps on my iPhone, I made my way in that direction and realised it was right near my favourite cheap veggie shop, Curtis Fresh, the cheapest veggie shop in Ballarat, and just near Darling Street. The oldest building standing in the street was the Methodist Church, built in 1862, and had since been renamed the Uniting Church in the 70s. Looking down Darling Street, I realised the end of the street was close to the Yarrawee River that I lived by. Suddenly I felt this river was the link to Grandad. Back home, I traced the Yarrawee from the back of my house in Ballarat East, which had recently been restored to its pre-gold mining glory, towards the city centre, past the next street, Princess Street, then to Nicholson Street, where it starts to become more citified with concrete, along to the Eastern Oval football ground at Scott Parade at the edge of the city, then underneath the railway line and railway station that takes the train to Melbourne. Appearing out the other side, next to Peter Wilmot Motors at Mare Street, across the road from Kathmandu. What are they doing here? They must have got lost. Directly across the road from the Good Guys, who were named after Grandad. The Yarrawee then heads underneath and down the length of bustling Grenville Street, which is the equivalent of Pearce Street in Perth City. It then flows onto Golden Point, near the very modern Fed Uni. This is where gold was first discovered in 1850. Flowing onto Hill Street, Yarrawee catchment, then into Redan, to this lovely little glade by this cute little bridge, and up this embankment is Darling Street. All that investigation happened about 18 months ago, and so when I walked into this street just up from that beautiful embankment, I was still operating partly by guesswork. Going on the assumption that the numbers would increase outwards from Skipton Street, where Curtis Fresh is, the lowest number I could find was 102. I tried looking along the other side of Skipton, but the numbers were even higher. In fact, confusingly, it started at 200. The only location that seemed to have a lower number was right next to the Uniting Church. The only thing is, there was no house there. It was now the basketball courts of the church. For a time, I assumed that the basketball courts of the church was the likely location of the birthplace home of Grandad. Fast forward to this week, and whilst working hard at my office, Cafe L'Espresso, in an important meeting with all my CEOs, I received a hot tip from a born and bred Ballaratian friend. Ring the archives of Fed Uni Mount Helen campus. It was there that I found out that around 1904, the council renumbered all the streets in additional 100s at each cross street. One street would be 100 upwards, the next cross street the numbers started at 200 upwards, the next 300, and so on. So that meant there was absolutely no relationship between the 82A Darling Street in the 1893 rates book and the number it would be now. What to do? Go to the cafe. There was still one more lead to follow up. The Australiana section of the Ballarat Central Library. It was there that I met Ballarat's historical Sherlock Holmes, the indefatigable Edith. Her keen and experienced eye was able to interpret the 1894 street directory, which I'd looked at rather blankly when viewing the same document at the Mechanics Institute Library. "Ah," she said, "you count the names back from the nearest cross street." To my delight, I saw that each cross street was marked on the page. Here is Pleasant Street. Here is Adair Street. And lo and behold, William Westlake, coppersmith, was the second name back from Adair Street. It was even listed as North Side, which meant that it would be on the right-hand side of the road driving from Skipton Street, up by the church. They were very thoughtful in those days. Edith, the unrelenting sleuth, then magically produced another street directory. This is Wise's 1904 street directory, published the first time after the numbers had been changed to the 100 groupings, she said. Looking at the Darling Street page, the names between Pleasant Street and Adair Street were in the 700s. Edith also showed me photos that were representative of wooden cottages of the time. At last, I felt close to the goal. Thanks, Edith. So I made my way back to Darling Street, but this time 7 streets further out from the main road Skipton Street, now also called Midland Highway Redan. Passing Pleasant Street, sure enough, the numbers started into the 700s. Looking to the right, the old north side, the numbers passed 702, 704, 706. I slowed down as I saw Adair Street coming closer and started looking for the second house back. As the car came to a halt, across the street, tucked between 80s-style brick veneer units, one house back from Adair, stood a cute little painted yellow wooden cottage, very much in the style of the 1880s and 90s. It was still so well kept, and like a lot of cottages of the time, had an add-on veranda. I stood silently in wonderment and let myself imagine what it would be like to be there over a century ago. It's wonderful to find Grandad's birthplace, so close to where I live. It's also a strange feeling, as even though it's the same house and intact, it's in the here and now, 124 years later, in a different world. When he lived in this house as a baby, the Band of Hope, which was one of the largest mines, was only 1 kilometre from Darling Street down Skipton Street towards the city. And today, that's just behind Crossroads Music, where I buy my music gear. The house is a little part of the time that he was born in, that has remained. This world has moved on, but we are still bound together in spirit. After having been through this little historical adventure back into my family past, I still feel that I'm bound to Grandad by the cute little Yarrawee River and by the 2 little glades that sit eternally at the end of our 2 streets.